There are places on Earth where humans aren't supposed to go. We thought it was because of the weather. We were wrong. 3 days ago, a surveillance satellite picked up a heat signature in Sector 7 of Antarctica. Deep in the frozen wasteland, temperatures should be -80. But something down there was radiating heat. We thought it was a volcano, but when we got there, it wasn't a mountain. Standing in the middle of the ice was a massive, bone-white tomb. It wasn't human, and it was waiting for us. Our GPS died first. Then the compasses started spinning like crazy. "Where are we?" Ryan, the youngest of the team, yelled over the wind. "Off the map," I replied. Through the blizzard, we saw a shape. Usually, shadows in the snow are black. This one was white, perfectly white. Nature doesn't make straight lines. But this thing had walls that were perfectly smooth, rising 100 feet into the air. It wasn't made of ice. It was made of some kind of pale stone I had never seen before. When we got within 50 feet of the structure, everything changed. The wind stopped, and the snow just vanished. There was a perfect circle around the tomb where the ground was dry, black rock. Snow fell from above, but before it could touch the white wall, it evaporated into steam. I took off my glove. The air was warm. It went from -80 to 70 degrees in a single step. "It's not a generator," Ryan whispered, staring at the wall. "It feels like body heat." I walked up to the wall. It glistened like polished marble. I reached out to touch it. I expected it to be freezing cold rock. Instead, it was warm and soft. It yielded slightly under my finger, just like skin. It wasn't stone. It was hard like bone, but smooth like flesh. I looked closer. It had microscopic pores. I pulled my hand back, wiped it on my jacket. We weren't standing in front of a building. We were standing in front of a massive biological shell. We circled the structure. No windows, just one entrance. But there was no handle, no keypad, no hinges. In the center of the door, there was just a deep impression, a handprint. But it wasn't human. The palm was too long. The fingers were slender and sharp, and I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 6, 6 fingers. Ryan pulled me back. "We shouldn't open this, sir. That's not a shelter, that's a tomb. And tombs aren't designed to be opened from the outside." Ryan was right. We should have turned back. But curiosity is a curse. I pressed my ear against the warm white wall. I wanted to hear if there was machinery inside. At first, silence. Then, a sound. Thump, thump, thump. Slow, heavy, once every 10 seconds. It wasn't a machine. It was a heartbeat. Something inside this white tomb. Or maybe the tomb itself was sleeping, and our footsteps just woke it up. The heartbeat was getting louder. "Don't do it," Ryan begged. I ignored him. I pulled off my glove. The cold air bit my skin for a second before I shoved my hand into the indentation. My hand had 5 fingers. The hole had 6. It shouldn't have fit. But as soon as I touched it, the white material moved. It felt like warm, wet clay. It rippled around my fingers, filling the gaps, sucking my hand in deeper. It wasn't a lock reading a key. It was a biological interface tasting my DNA. A sharp prick stung my palm. "It took a blood sample." I yanked my hand back. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low groan vibrated through the ice. The door didn't slide open like an elevator. It split down the middle. It looked biological. Thick strands of white, fibrous material stretched and snapped like tearing muscle. It was grotesque. A blast of air hit us. It wasn't cold. It was hot, humid air rushing out into the freezing Antarctic waste. Steam billowed around us, blinding us for a moment. The tomb was breathing out. "Masks on!" I ordered. We didn't know what kind of pathogens had been sealed in there for 1,000,000 years. Even through the filters I could smell it. It didn't smell like rot. It smelled like ozone and copper, like a hospital room that had been sterilized with electricity. "The heat sensors are off the charts," Ryan said, checking his wrist computer. "It's 80 degrees inside, and humidity is 90%. We turned on our flashlights. The beams cut through the steam, revealing a long, white corridor that sloped downwards. We stepped inside. The door sealed shut behind us with a wet thud. We were trapped. "Flashlights off," I whispered. "Look at the walls." In the darkness, the tomb came alive. Deep beneath the white, translucent surface of the walls, a network of blue veins was pulsing. Light flowed through them in a rhythmic cycle, matching the heartbeat we heard earlier. The light was guiding us deeper. It was mesmerizing. It's not just a structure, I realized. It's a circulatory system. We're walking inside a giant artery. The corridor ended at a massive spiral ramp. It curved downwards into the dark, spiraling deep into the Earth's crust. I looked over the edge. It went down for miles. Far below, in the abyss, I saw a brighter blue light pulsing. The core. "We have to go down," I said. Ryan hesitated. "Sir, my scanner, it's picking up movement down there. Not one signal. Thousands." I gripped my ice axe. "Then stay close. We aren't the first ones to enter this place, but let's hope we're the first ones to leave." The spiral ramp ended. We stepped onto the floor of the main chamber. I shined my light across the room. The beam didn't hit a wall. It just kept going. The room was the size of a football stadium, and it was full. Covering the floor, arranged in perfect rows, were thousands of pods. They looked like giant, translucent white grapes, about 4 feet tall. They were pulsing with that same blue light. "It's a garden," Ryan whispered, terrified. He was wrong. Gardens are for plants. These were incubators. I walked up to the nearest pod. The outer shell was soft, like an amniotic sac. I held my flashlight against it. The light cut through the murky fluid inside. There was something floating in there. It was humanoid, curled up in the fetal position, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the knees bent backward, and the face. It didn't have a nose, just 2 vertical slits. It looked peaceful, sleeping, waiting for the alarm clock that we just accidentally triggered. Ryan stumbled. His ice axe clattered against the floor. Clang. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent chamber. Inside the pod I was watching, the creature twitched. Then its eyes snapped open. They weren't human eyes. They were solid, glossy black orbs. No whites, no pupils. The blue light pulsing through the veins of the pod suddenly shifted. It turned a violent, angry red. The fluid inside began to boil. It wasn't sleeping anymore. It was accelerating. I backed away, aiming my flare gun. "Ryan, move!" I yelled. The sound of tearing wet fabric filled the air. A hand burst through the side of the pod, a pale 6-fingered hand with translucent skin. It clawed at the air, grasping for freedom. Thick, clear slime spilled out onto the floor, steaming in the cool air. The creature dragged itself out of the sack, coughing up fluid. It stood up on shaky, reverse-jointed legs. It was taller than us, much taller. The thing looked at us. It tilted its head, processing what we were. Then it opened its mouth. It didn't roar. It let out a high-pitched ultrasonic shriek that vibrated in my teeth. The sound wave traveled across the room. One by one, the blue lights in the distance flickered and turned red. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The nursery was waking up. We hadn't just hatched one monster. We had triggered a chain reaction. The hive mind was active, and it was hungry. We turned and sprinted for the spiral ramp. "Don't look back!" I shouted. Ryan looked back. The creature wasn't walking anymore. It had dropped to all fours. Its joints popped and rotated backward, allowing it to move like a massive, pale spider. It was fast, terrifyingly fast. It skittered across the floor, its claws clicking against the hard surface. It wasn't just chasing us, it was hunting, and the hundreds of red lights behind it were hatching, joining the swarm. We hit the incline of the ramp, lungs burning, as the first creature started climbing the walls to cut us off. It leaped from the wall, aiming for Ryan. I spun around and fired my flare gun. Whoosh! The magnesium flare hit the creature squarely in the chest. It didn't just burn, it sizzled. The creature's skin was highly sensitive. It shrieked, a sound like grinding metal, and fell back off the ramp, thrashing in the darkness below. The red light of the burning flare illuminated the pit. I saw them, dozens of them, crawling up the spiral column like ants. "They hate the light!" I yelled. "Keep your flashlights in their eyes!" We ran higher, trying to reach the surface level, but the tomb wasn't going to let us leave. The walls started to move. It wasn't a mechanical door closing, it was peristalsis, the way a throat swallows food. The white material bulged inward, narrowing the path. The ceiling dipped lower. The structure sensed a foreign object inside. Us! And it was trying to crush us or keep us in. "Crawling!" I commanded. We dropped to our knees, scrambling through the shrinking tunnel as the walls groaned and pressed against our backpacks. We squeezed into a small ventilation alcove to catch our breath. We turned off our lights, hoping they relied on movement. Silence returned to the tomb. Then, a voice floated up from the dark. "Help me!" It was Ryan's voice. Perfect pitch, perfect tone. Ryan was sitting right next to me, eyes wide with terror. He shook his head frantically. The voice came again, closer this time. "Help! Me, Ryan!" The creature wasn't just an animal. It had listened to us. It had recorded our voices. It was mimicking us to lure us out. It was intelligent. We realized the trick and kept moving. We scrambled up the last stretch of the ramp. We reached the top. The entrance corridor was right there. Freedom, the cold Antarctic air. But we stopped. The way out was gone. While we were down in the nursery, the tomb had sealed the entrance. A thick, amber-colored wall of hardened resin blocked the path. I swung my ice axe at it. Thwack! It bounced off. It was harder than concrete. We were trapped. And from the darkness behind us, we heard the clicking of hundreds of claws getting closer. The clicking sounds were getting louder. They were just around the curve of the ramp. "We need a way out!" Ryan screamed, hammering the resin wall. "Search the floor!" I ordered. I scanned the perimeter. The walls were smooth, seamless bone, except for one spot. Near the floor, tucked behind a ridge of muscle-like stone, I saw something gray and jagged. I crawled over. It was metal. Rusted iron bars. It wasn't grown by the tomb. It was welded there. Someone had cut a hole in the alien wall and installed a ventilation grate. "Ryan!" "Here!" We didn't have time to ask who put it there. We jammed our ice axes into the rust and pried it open. I shoved Ryan into the shaft first and squeezed in after him. It was a tight fit. My shoulders scraped the sides. It smelled of old dust and diesel fumes, a human smell. I grabbed the grate to pull it back in place just as a face appeared in the opening. It was the mimic. It smiled, a wide, skin-splitting grin. It reached a six-fingered hand through the gap, grazing my boot. "Go! Go! Go!" I yelled, kicking at the fingers. We scrambled deeper into the dark metal intestine, listening to the creature screech in frustration behind us. We crawled for what felt like 10 minutes. Then the metal floor beneath us vanished. "Whoa!" We tumbled out of the vent, falling about 8 feet. We hit the ground hard. My flashlight rolled away, spinning on the floor. I gasped. The air here was freezing. We were back in the Antarctic cold. I grabbed my light and stood up. The floor wasn't white bone anymore. It was concrete. Cold, cracked concrete. We weren't in the tomb anymore. We were in a room built attached to it. I swept the room with my beam. It was a bunker, a hidden observation post. There were rows of dusty wooden tables. On them sat bulky, old-fashioned radio equipment, reel-to-reel tape recorders, and yellowed maps. Ryan wiped dust off a crate. 1962, he read the stamp. This stuff is from the Cold War. My mind raced. The history books said this sector had never been explored, but someone had been here 60 years ago. They had found the White Tomb, drilled into it, and set up a lab to study it. And then they left, or disappeared. In the corner of the room, sitting behind a heavy steel desk, was the commander, or what was left of him. He was a skeleton, still wrapped in a decaying fur-lined parka. In his right skeletal hand, he gripped a rusty revolver. There was a hole in the side of his skull. He hadn't been killed by the monsters. He had done it himself. In his left hand, frozen in a death grip, was a leather logbook. I gently pried it loose. The pages were brittle. I opened to the final entry. The handwriting was shaky. October 14, 1962. We woke them up. God forgive us, we woke them up. I flipped back to the beginning of the logbook. The early entries were optimistic. August 1962. We have secured the anomaly. The structure emits a constant thermal output. It's a biological reactor. If we can harness this heat, we can power the entire eastern seaboard forever. They didn't see a tomb. They saw a battery. They had drilled into the wall that explained the grate and started siphoning the heat. But they got greedy. They wanted to know what fueled it. September 1st. We have breached the inner chamber. We found the eggs. The biology is remarkably compatible with terrestrial DNA. Sir, look at this, Ryan called out. He pointed to a dusty chalkboard on the wall. Faded diagrams showed two DNA strands merging. I read the next entry. The handwriting was getting messy. The organisms inside the pods are blank slates. They adapt to whatever DNA is introduced. We injected a sample of human genetic material into Pod 4. We want to see if we can create a worker drone that can survive the cold. My stomach turned. The creatures outside, the ones chasing us. They weren't ancient aliens. They were hybrids. We were being hunted by our own cousins. The entry skipped a few days. Then, panic. October 5th. Mistake. Big mistake. The human DNA acted as a catalyst. The subject in Pod 4 didn't just grow, it evolved. It hatched early. It killed Dr. Evans. October 8th. It's intelligent. It learned to mimic Evans's voice. It's calling to us from the ventilation shafts. It freed the others. They are all awake now. I looked at the pistol in the skeleton's hand. He knew the bunker was compromised. He knew they couldn't escape. He sealed the vent to keep them in, not to keep himself safe. We pushed through a heavy steel door into the main lab. One entire wall was made of reinforced glass, 3 inches thick. It was an observation deck. It looked directly back inside the White Tomb, hovering halfway up the spiral ramp. Through the glass, I could see the ramp where we had just been running, and I saw them. Hundreds of pale, spider-like shapes were swarming up the spiral, sniffing the air. They were congregated around the ventilation grate we had just crawled through. They knew we were in the walls. And then one of them turned its eyeless face toward the glass window. Ryan backed away from the window. "Sir, what is that?" In the center of the room stood a massive preservation tank filled with cloudy yellow fluid. I wiped the condensation off the glass. Floating inside was Patient Zero, the first experiment. It was smaller than the ones outside. It had a human face, but 6 fingers. Its mouth was sewn shut with wire. A plaque on the base read, "Subject 4, failed." Suddenly, the liquid in the tank rippled. The thing's eyes opened. They weren't black. They were blue, human blue, and they looked terrified. It wasn't dead. It had been in stasis for 60 years. A loud crack snapped us back to reality. On the observation window, a spiderweb fracture appeared. One of the pale creatures was clinging to the glass on the outside, hammering it with its bone-hard fists. Then another joined it. Then a third. They covered the window like insects, blocking out the light from the tomb. The glass groaned under their weight. "It won't hold!" Ryan yelled, backing away from the tank. Subject 4, floating in the yellow fluid, started thrashing wildly, its blue human eyes wide with panic. It knew what was coming. It knew what its brothers would do to it. Subject 4 wasn't trying to attack us. It was trying to warn us. It slammed its deformed hand against the inside of its tank, pointing frantically toward a heavy steel door at the back of the lab. The stencil on the door read, "Armory." The creature looked at me, then at the cracking window. Its expression was pure sorrow. It was a prisoner here, just like us. Smash! A chunk of the observation window gave way. A shard of glass the size of a dinner plate fell to the floor. The vacuum seal was broken. The screeching got louder. "Go!" I shouted. "Get the door!" Ryan kicked the latch. The armory door swung open. It smelled of gun oil and old wood. Racks of M14 rifles lined the walls. They were heavy, wood-stock weapons from the 60s. I grabbed one and wrecked the slide. It was stiff, but the action was smooth. "Ammo!" I yelled. Ryan grabbed a crate of 7.62mm rounds. Then I saw it in the corner. The ultimate weapon for clearing bunkers. An M2 flamethrower. The tanks were heavy, and I prayed the fuel hadn't gelled or evaporated over 60 years. I strapped the harness on. It felt heavy, comforting. If those things liked the cold, let's see how they liked napalm. We loaded the rifles just as the main window finally failed. With a sound like a crashing chandelier, the glass exploded inward. The swarm poured into the lab like a tidal wave of white limbs. They didn't come for us immediately. They went for the tank. They swarmed. Subject 4, they weren't rescuing it. They were tearing it apart. The hybrid inside the tank screamed, a muffled, bubbly sound as the glass shattered and the yellow fluid washed over the floor. They were purging the weak link. "Open fire!" I screamed. The deafening boom of the M14s filled the small room. The bullets punched holes in them, knocking them back, but they kept coming. They didn't feel pain like we did. "Cover me!" I yelled to Ryan. I stepped forward and squeezed the trigger on the flamethrower. Click! Whoosh! A stream of liquid fire arced across the lab. It hit the front line of the swarm. The effect was instant. Their pale, translucent skin blistered and popped. The fire stuck to them. They shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and scrambled back, knocking over their own kind. "To the exit!" I commanded, spraying a wall of fire between us and them. "We have to get to the surface!" The corridor leading to the surface ladder was a choke point. I held the trigger down, bathing the tunnel in fire. The heat was unbearable. The sprinkler system had failed decades ago, so the smoke was thick and choking. I glanced at the pressure gauge on my tank. "Red zone. I'm running dry." I coughed. "Ryan, move! Get to the ladder!" The creatures were hesitating, afraid of the flames, but they were learning. Some were crawling along the ceiling, trying to get above the arc of the fire. They knew my weapon was running out of breath. Ryan scrambled up the rusted maintenance ladder. I followed right behind him, ditching the heavy, empty flamethrower tank. We were halfway up the shaft when a screech echoed from below. A pale hand shot out of the smoke. It grabbed Ryan's left boot. He screamed, losing his grip on the run. He dangled by one hand. "Kick it!" I yelled, bracing myself against the ladder walls. I aimed the M14 upward and fired a single shot past Ryan's leg. The bullet blew the creature's hand apart. It shrieked and fell back into the darkness. "Climb! Don't stop!" I roared. We reached the top. The wheel on the hatch was frozen stuck. "Help me turn it!" We both shoved against the cold steel. My muscles screamed. Creak! The ice seal broke. We pushed the hatch open. Instantly, the roar of the Antarctic wind drowned out the screeches from below. Snow poured into the shaft. We clawed our way out, rolling onto the ice. The temperature drop was brutal. We went from a humid, burning bunker to minus 60 degrees in seconds. My sweat instantly froze on my skin. We were out, but we were blind. I couldn't see 5 feet in front of me. The blizzard was a white wall. "Where is the snowcat?" Ryan yelled, his voice barely audible over the wind. "North, 50 yards!" I pointed into the void. We stumbled forward, sinking knee-deep in the drifts. Then I saw a shadow to my left. The creatures had followed us out. I thought the cold would stop them. I was wrong. They didn't freeze. Their metabolism burned so hot that steam rose from their bodies. They moved through the snow like ghosts, tracking our heat signatures. In this white hell, we were glowing beacons. We saw the orange shape of the snowcat vehicle. We threw open the doors and dived inside, locking them instantly. Thump! Something landed on the roof. The metal dented inward. "Start it! Start it!" I slammed the magazine into my rifle. Ryan turned the key. Chug! Chug! Click! The battery was cold. The engine wouldn't turn over. Another heavy impact hit the side door. The window cracked. A pale face pressed against the glass, steaming in the cold air. Its black eyes stared right at me. "Come on, you piece of junk!" Ryan screamed, turning the key again. The side window exploded. Freezing wind and glass shards sprayed the cabin. A hand, wet, pale, and six-fingered shot through the broken window, grabbing Ryan by the collar of his parka. "Get off me!" Ryan screamed, kicking at the door. The creature pulled him towards the jagged glass teeth of the window frame. I leveled my rifle, but I couldn't shoot without hitting Ryan. Ryan turned the key one last time. V-room. The diesel engine roared to life. The vibration shook the whole cabin. "Go!" I yelled. "Drive!" Ryan slammed the throttle forward. The tracks spun on the ice for a terrifying second, screaming against the permafrost. Then they caught. The snowcat lurched forward like a beast. The creature holding Ryan lost its grip and fell off the side. Thump! Crunch! We ran right over it. I felt the sickening bump as the heavy steel treads crushed bone and cartilage. We burst through a wall of snow and onto the open ice sheet. I looked in the side mirror. Through the swirling white, I saw a dozen shadows sprinting after us on all fours. The speedometer hit 40 miles per hour. That's fast for a snowcat. But it wasn't fast enough. These things were built for this environment. They didn't sink in the snow. They glided over it. I watched out the rear window. They were gaining on us. One of them leaped, clearing a 10-foot gap, and landed on the back of the vehicle. I heard its claws tearing at the metal roof hatch. "Keep it steady!" I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up, aiming my rifle at the ceiling. "I'm going to introduce him to the roof rack." I fired 3 rounds through the roof. The scratching stopped. The body rolled off the back. But then I noticed something worse. 2 of the creatures had peeled off from the main group. They were sprinting wide, flanking us on the left and right. They were herding us. "Ryan, they're pushing us! East, so what?" he yelled, gripping the wheel. "East is the cliff edge. They're trying to drive us off the glacier." They were smart. They knew the terrain better than we did. They weren't just hunting, they were executing a maneuver. Ahead of us, the white horizon suddenly broke. A jagged black line cut across the ice. A crevasse. A crack in the glacier, hundreds of feet deep. "Brake!" I screamed. "No!" Ryan yelled. "If we stop, they swarm us." He didn't hit the brakes. He hit the gas. The engine screamed. The jagged edge of the ice rushed toward us. We hit the ramp of a snowdrift at 50 miles per hour. The snowcat went airborne. For a second, we were weightless. I saw the dark abyss beneath us. I saw the monsters skid to a halt at the edge, screeching in frustration. Then, gravity took over. We hit the other side. It wasn't a smooth landing. The front tracks clipped the edge of the ice. Crash! The suspension snapped. The vehicle slammed into the snow, bounced once, and rolled onto its side. My head hit the window. Darkness flickered for a second. When I opened my eyes, everything was sideways. The engine was dead. Smoke filled the cabin. "Ryan!" he groaned. He was bleeding from the forehead, but he was moving. We were alive. We had cleared the gap. We kicked the back door open and crawled out into the snow. I raised my rifle, aiming back at the cliff. They were there, a dozen of them lined up on the opposite edge of the crevasse. They shrieked and paced back and forth, clicking their claws. But the gap was too wide even for them. They watched us with those empty black eyes. "We made it!" Ryan laughed, hysterical tears freezing on his face. "They can't follow us!" We turned our backs on them and began the long walk to the coastal radio tower. The storm was clearing. It took us 4 hours to hike to the emergency beacon. The sun was finally rising, a pale, cold disk on the horizon. We broke into the relay station hut. It was warm, it had food, and most importantly, it had a long-range transmitter. Ryan slumped into a chair, grabbing a bottle of water. "Call them," he said. "Get the chopper. We're going home." I sat down at the console and powered it up. The hum of the radio was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I reached for the microphone, but then I felt an itch, a deep, burning itch in my right palm. I froze. I remembered the prick I felt when I put my hand in the wall to open the tomb. I thought it was just a blood sample. I slowly peeled off my glove. Ryan looked over. "What is it?" I stared at my hand. The veins weren't green anymore. They were glowing, pulsing with a faint electric blue light, the same light as the tomb. And on the side of my palm, just below my pinky, the skin was stretching. A hard, white nub of bone was pushing through, a sixth finger. The tomb hadn't just studied my DNA, it had rewritten it. I looked at Ryan. He was sleeping, but I could see the blue veins starting to spread up his neck too. We weren't survivors, we were carriers. If we went back to civilization, if we brought this biology to the cities, the human race would be replaced in a month. I pressed the transmit button. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Sector 7 Expedition." The radio crackled back. "We read you. Rescue is inbound. What is your status?" I looked at my mutating hand. "Cancel rescue," I whispered. "I repeat, do not land. Initiate quarantine protocol Omega. Nuke the site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. END transmission."